Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, absurdism in the extreme. It's all available here in the Tales from the Omni Vault book series. Check the description for Amazon links so you can get your copies and start reading today. Thank you all, and now, on to the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, and it looks like people are really loving Ultraman Rising. I have to say, I really do enjoy it as well. I was not sure about it based on those trailers, but I ultimately did wind up liking it, even with the various flaws that run throughout, and believe me, there are many. It's so good at tapping into the emotional side of things that ultimately the flaws don't bother me. I mean, maybe some of them still kind of get to me, but it's not like they outweigh the good that the movie does. And I want you all to remember that. I do like Ultraman Rising. I want you to keep that in mind specifically because for the rest of this video, I'm going to be addressing what I still believe to be a major plot hole, but also how it can be fixed. Just as a reminder, the way the movie begins is that the human villain, Dr. Onda, steals the egg of a giant monster named Gigantron, bringing it into the city where Gigantron goes on a rampage trying to find it. Ultraman attempts to intervene, Gigantron gets shot down. Ultraman winds up with the egg, although it hatches, and now Ken, the Ultra host, has to raise the infant kaiju named Omni in secret. Why was the egg brought to Japan in the first place? Because Dr. Onda wants to use the infant to find Kaiju Island, a location that everybody seems to know exists, yet nobody has ever seen. It's completely uncharted, a total unknown. But he figures Omni, being a kaiju from Kaiju Island, will use her natural instincts at some point to go back to the island. They can follow her there, and then they can launch an assault and destroy every monster there. But the question is, if nobody knows where Kaiju Island is located, where did Onda get the egg? I mean, if the kaiju all come from this one island and nobody knows where that island is, then it's safe to assume that the egg was laid on the island, so Onda went to the island, got the egg, brought it back, and intends to use the hatchling to lead him back to the island he doesn't know the location of, even though that's where he got the egg from. It doesn't make sense. Now, I brought up that much in the initial review, but in the comment section I did see someone say that maybe the fix for this is that Gigantron goes to a different island to lay eggs. So Omni might have technically been born, or at least the egg was laid, on a different island. Now, such an island is never mentioned in the movie. They speak of Kaiju Island all the time, but no other potential location where a kaiju might go. We only ever know that there's Kaiju Island, maybe, and there's Japan, where all the monsters seem to gravitate towards when they come out of the sea. Now, I really do think that this is a glaring plot hole in the movie. And to demonstrate how, I'm going to be exceedingly generous to the movie and assume the following: that the reason people believe Kaiju Island exists is because all the kaiju just seem to come out of the Pacific Ocean and land in Japan, and when Ultraman sends them back, they retreat and go who knows where. And part of this assumption would also state that there's never been a kaiju sighting anywhere else in the world. They just sort of pop out of the ocean, they go to Japan, then they go back into the ocean. That's the only place they've ever been seen. So figuring that they've got to go to and come from somewhere, they figure maybe there must be some kind of an island out in the middle of the ocean that hasn't been found yet, that all these monsters just sort of naturally live on. Who knows why they come to Japan, but those two locations would have to be the only places kaiju are ever seen. So, if we're making that assumption, right off the bat, it pokes a hole in the idea that Gigantron would go to a second island to lay an egg, because that would be, first of all, anomalous for Gigantron. If we're assuming that the kaiju only ever go to Japan and have never been seen anywhere else, Gigantron would be the one singular exception who goes to a completely different location. But if Gigantron goes to a completely different location, how do we know the other kaiju aren't doing something similar? How do we know they are restricted to a single island? Maybe there's a whole bunch of islands. Maybe the kaiju really do show up everywhere and we just haven't noticed it yet because they only seem to show up in metropolitan areas when they're in Japan. So it doesn't really seem to stack up there. But let's continue being generous and assume that maybe Gigantron is the one exception. For some reason, Gigantron goes to a separate island to lay eggs and then brings the infant back to Kaiju Island. And that's the only kaiju species in the entire world that's known to do that. Otherwise, they just go to the island in Japan and back. So, if that is the case, then Dr. Onda's plan becomes needlessly complicated, not to mention reckless and just plain dumb. So, clearly, the evidence shows us that Gigantron is a very maternal creature. She's not like a sea turtle who just builds the nest, dumps the egg, and leaves. She's more like an alligator. She's going to stick around the nest, keeping an eye on the egg, protecting it, and when the egg hatches, she's going to raise the young, at least for a little bit, and part of that would involve bringing the young back to the island. So there is no reason whatsoever for Dr. Onda to take the egg off this hypothetical second island and bring it to the Japanese mainland. In fact, that's the worst possible thing he could do, because he's then needlessly endangering the populace. Remember, Dr. Onda is the villain, but he's a villain who believes he's fighting for the good of mankind. And no matter how delusional he is, I don't think he can possibly rationalize the idea that it's okay to endanger that many people as part of his plan. Plus, why waste the resources bringing the egg and by extension Gigantron to the mainland, when in fact, it's better to just stay on the island, wait for the egg to hatch, get some tracking devices on both the mother and the child, and then you can just wait for them to leave, track them on your computer, see where they stop, mark that spot on a map, send some drones, and if it's Kaiju Island, you found it. Now you have all the time you need to figure out some kind of attack plan. No need to endanger the populace. It really is kind of weird he wouldn't have just done that. But then again, that raises another question. Why wouldn't that have been done sooner? You know, because in this universe, Ultraman avoids killing kaiju as much as he can. They don't show him killing kaiju at all in this universe, so it's possible he might have had to at some point, but if he can help it, he avoids it. He just fights them off until they retreat. And it has to be them retreating. He can't be the one bringing them back to the island, because otherwise that would mean the original Ultraman, Ken's dad, would know where Kaiju Island is, but he doesn't. So, unless these tracking devices are a very, very recent invention, I can't think of a single reason why the KDF wouldn't have just stuck a tracking device on a fleeing kaiju after Ultraman beat it into submission, and put Kaiju Island on the map years ago. So no matter how you look at it, this is a plot hole. No matter how you look at it, this is a plot hole, and it does directly affect the plot. Part of the argument that was started about plot holes not mattering is that plot holes don't actually have an effect on the story. That is not a generalization you should ever hang your hat on. And here, especially, it does affect the story, because the story is about Ken, the Ultraman, having to raise an infant kaiju. That infant kaiju needs to be brought to the mainland in order for Ken to wind up with it. In order for that kaiju to be brought to the mainland, the villain who brings it there has to know where that egg is. But we've established that nobody knows where the kaiju come from, even though they know what it's called and what kind of a place it is, apparently. So how do you get the egg from this unknown location to the mainland if you don't know where the location is? And the whole second island thing is 100% a fan theory. There is nothing in the movie itself to suggest it. So this is kind of a big deal. Okay, so hopefully I have established that this does indeed qualify as a massive plot hole. But the thing is, I do want to be constructive because I do like this movie and I want to see this sort of thing avoided in any potential sequels. So let's try this as a potential fix. It will require some stuff to be rewritten further down, but I do think it would ultimately eliminate the problem. So the main source of the plot hole is that Kaiju Island's location is unknown. That is the thing that's causing all of these problems. So instead, let's change that. In our new version, Kaiju Island is on every map. It's been charted. People know that's where the kaiju come from. But the tricky part is getting there. Since the movie does borrow some elements from other kaiju movies, let's borrow something from Pacific Rim and say that while Kaiju Island does exist in our reality, there's some weird anomalous force surrounding it that the kaiju can pass through and some animals can pass through, not all but some, but humans and human technology cannot. They've tried. They've launched rockets, they've dropped bombs, they've tried sending landing parties. They always run into this thing that repels them. Now, the only other being they know of that might be able to pass through is Ultraman, but he's not considered a reliable ally in this universe, so they're not going to count on him to get them in there. So Dr. Onda's still driven by revenge. He wants to kill all of the monsters, and he eventually gets the idea that if only a kaiju can get to Kaiju Island, then he just needs a kaiju of his own. He has observed that there's this one relatively peaceful kaiju species called Gigantron that goes to a different nearby island to lay eggs. It's not too far away from Kaiju Island, and more importantly, it's not covered by that weird force field, so it is accessible to humans. And Onda has been developing a theory that if he had a kaiju that was subdued or either knocked out or wounded enough that it could be moved around without struggling, he might be able to infuse it with human technology to keep it alive, turning it into a cyborg, and if that works, it should be able to access the island, and it would be armed to the teeth so that when it got there, it could just lay waste to everything on Kaiju Island, and he would finally have his revenge. Gigantron seems like the perfect candidate because it's away from the island. So he executes his plan. He steals the egg, bringing it to the mainland, knowing Gigantron is going to follow, but he has the KDF waiting on the shore. So they blast Gigantron as soon as she gets there. Ultraman tries to intervene, but ultimately it's to no avail. Gigantron appears to be killed. And it's a perfect cover, of course, because nobody's going to question the KDF shooting at a giant monster that was about to attack the city. With Gigantron secured, that is his goal. Onda figures, we don't need the egg anymore, and I don't want it to hatch and have another one of these things running around. Just dump it in the ocean, which he does. But Ken sees it, he recovers it, then he gets the egg hatches into Emmy. The movie pretty much can play out from there unaltered, until we get to the baby's day out sequence, where Emmy escapes Ken's home and goes on her little tour of Tokyo, and everybody realizes, oh, there's a baby kaiju out there, and Ultraman's protecting it. From that point, Onda can officially say he's done with the Silver Giant. He's officially chosen his side, and it's not the side of mankind. But while he's also initially angry that the baby survived, he also realizes maybe it's a blessing in disguise. In our new version, he's been working on a poison gas that he's certain will kill kaiju, but he's never been able to test it because, again, can't get it to the island because it needs to be administered through human technology, which gets repelled by whatever that force is. And he's not going to unleash it when there's a kaiju in a city, because the cocktail is absolutely going to be lethal to humans. And even though he's willing to potentially risk Gigantron attacking, as long as he's prepared, there's no way he can justify unleashing this gas on a city, especially since, well, if it works, he's potentially killed a lot of people, more than the kaiju might have done, and if it doesn't work, he's killed a lot of people and not a kaiju. He will be treated worse than a war criminal. But if he has Emmy in custody, he's got a live test subject. There's a bug flying around here. I hope it's not being too distracting. And if it works, he just has to load it into Mecha Gigantron's arsenal as part of his ultimate plan. So now there are even bigger stakes involved with keeping Emmy safe. But otherwise, I do feel like that would fix the plot hole. And again, I want to remind everyone, I do like Ultraman Rising. I've just been thinking about this for a while, and I feel like if there's one major area of the movie that needs fixing, it's that. And I do feel like what I proposed just now is at least one possible way to fix it. Hopefully, if there is a sequel, and judging by the reception, I think there's a strong chance there will be, it doesn't run into similar problems. But we will see. For now, though, I just wanted to put all of that out there for consideration. And, yeah, I've done that, so that's it. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.